Okay, so this is week 2 of our Dharma Night discussions. Last week, Amaravajra started talking about the Four Noble Truths, and I'm going to continue that talk this evening. Just as a very quick recap of last week, Amaravajra told us that the Four Noble Truths was part of the Buddha's first teaching after he gained enlightenment, and it's also a very concise formula of his entire Dharmic teaching. So the Dharma is both a word that means the truth or reality, and it also means the Buddha's teaching that helps us lead to that realization. So she told us about the first 2 truths. So the first truth was that there is suffering. We experience suffering in our lives. And that can be of pain, physical pain or mental pain. It might be because we can't get what we want, or we're forced to take things that we don't want. Or it might be just like an existential suffering where we just don't know how we fit within the universe. So, and then she told us about the second noble truth, which was the cause of that suffering, which is craving. And that's the first 2 truths. And tonight I'm going to talk about the second 2. And what Amaravajra also said was that the Buddha used a sort of formula which was the contemporary sort of medical method for diagnosing and prescribing cures for illnesses. And so, if you like, what Amaravajra talked about in the first 2 truths was the diagnosis of our illness, which is suffering, and the cure of, and the cause of that, which is suffering. And tonight, the third and fourth truth, that's, if you like, the prescriptions to what we do about it. So the third truth is quite simple. It just says the cessation of our suffering is the cessation of our craving. And the fourth noble truth is the way to that cessation, and that's what I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about. So, and the way to that cessation is the following the Noble Eightfold Path. So I'm afraid it's another list. I'm not going to go through in any detail the Eightfolds. We don't have time for that. I will go through them just so you're aware of them. But what I wanted to do was to first of all make you aware of those the 8 aspects of that path, and then just to make some general points about the Eightfold Path. Because in the following 8 weeks we're going to be talking about each element in more detail, so we'll be able to sort of discover a bit more about it. So yeah, the Eightfold Path, so the Buddha identified aspects of our life which we could, if we addressed them correctly, would lead us towards the cessation of suffering. So that those 8 aspects I'll go through relatively quickly. And the first one is what is called right view or right vision. And that's basically the extent to which our understanding of our experience aligns with the Buddha's teaching of reality. And then the second aspect is right intent or right emotion, and that's the extent to which we're able to engage our emotions to work alongside our spiritual aspirations and do what we think we should do to move forward in our spiritual life. And you could say that coming to an evening like this is one way of practicing right intention. The next aspect is maybe slightly surprising. It's right speech. Speech has a very important place in Buddhism, and the extent to which we can speak in a truthful way, in a kindly way, in a helpful way, and in a harmonious way, is considered to be a very important part of our being. Then comes right action. So action is, basically how we act in the world. So our acts of body, speech and mind have an impact on the world and on ourselves. And that involves the sort of realms of karma, which says briefly that if our actions are motivated from feelings of selflessness, basically, or compassion, love, generosity, then the effects on ourselves and on others will be beneficial, and the opposite is the case if they're motivated by greed, hatred and delusion. So that's right action, and then there's right livelihood. So the Buddha actually identified a number of livelihoods which we in fact shouldn't follow if we wanted to make spiritual progress. And the trades he spoke about were trades in armaments, trades in living beings, in trafficking beings, or in intoxicants or poisons. So these were, so basically they're trades which actively harm people. And of course today we could probably add a few to the list. And then next we come into the next aspects of the path are more mind-oriented. So the right effort is our deals with encouraging positive mental states in our minds and discouraging negative mental states, very briefly. And then something, right mindfulness, which maybe won't be a surprise, and it's something we all know about Buddhism. It's about awareness of things around us, awareness of ourselves, and awareness of reality in general. And lastly, right concentration, which is, I suppose, the extent to which we can dwell or be or act from a place of wisdom. So that's the sort of whirlwind tour through the eight aspects. And as I say, don't worry, of course you'll revise them when you go home. But after that, we'll talk about them in more detail in the following weeks, and they're quite interesting, each one of them. But just a few general points about the Noble Eightfold Path to sort of pull out. And the first one, I suppose, is it still seems relevant. I mean, these aspects were identified by the Buddha 2,500 years ago. And they still seem to be fairly intelligible now. You know, we can understand. We don't need any translation of those aspects. We sort of know what they mean pretty much. When we come to talk more about them, you'll see that they actually expand out quite a long way when you start addressing each point. But they're all in the headline sort of aspect is quite understandable. The next one is, because it's a list, we tend to look at it from a perspective, you sort of think, first of all, do number one, then number two, then number three, but it's not like that. The aspects of the path are approached in a more combined way. The word escapes me. One way of looking at it is that we can look at the first aspect, right view, or right vision, and we can say that sort of drives the rest of them. If we behave in a way, act in the world in the other 7 aspects in ways which are in alignment to our vision, then we'll move closer to that vision, and we'll probably find that vision sort of opens out and takes us further on. And so if we follow our spiritual aspirations, it has a transformative effect. All of the different the other aspects. So we could say the expression quite often used is that they have a vision and transformation aspect. So in that way, it seems to join them more together. It seems it's not as much of a list. And if we consider another translation for the words the Buddha actually used to describe the Noble Eightfold Path, it might be described as the 8-limbed path. And sort of the image that comes to mind for me is like a starfish with 8 legs, and perhaps the leading limb of the starfish might be the vision. But the vision can't go anywhere unless the rest of the starfish goes with it, and they all might be moving at different times. But it's all one organism. It's all one thing. So so the point I'm trying to make is that all of these 8 elements we're talking about, we're working on all of them. We're practicing all of them at the same time in order to make movement towards our spiritual aspirations. And that what we're trying to do is to raise the heights of our aspirations and change our behaviours in accordance with that, and that's sort of what the Eightfold Path is telling us. And lastly, the last point I want to make is Bhante Sangharakshita, the founder of Triratna, in his book on the Buddha's Eightfold Path, he talked about rather than saying right vision, right intent, etc., he used the word perfect, and for me that sort of it's a more attractive sort of word, because it seems to open up a whole spectrum of places we can be along the path in this. It's not like you've got it right or you've got it wrong. It's much more a graded path, and it also sort of points to the fact that maybe reaching the end of that path is maybe not just round the corner. It's quite a long slog.
Okay.
Well, when I was reading about this, I was looking at the sutta,
Oh, right.
and in the first teaching. So the first thing he does, isn't it? The first people he gives this teaching to is the 5 ascetics who he spends all the time with, and who initially had disowned him because he's left their ascetic life. And once he comes back and he tells them first, isn't he, about the middle way, and about their ascetic life is perhaps not the right way of doing it, and also he's not the life of luxury, I think they called it, is not the way to do it. There's a sort of a middle way approach, and he tells them about the Four Noble Truths, and as it Kundanya sees that, and he's almost instantly enlightened.
Yes.
And what sort of interested me was it's like when we were talking about making progress along these limbs, but it might be a long way, but clearly these people who didn't know his teaching of the Four Noble Truths, they sort of gone a long way towards it.
Yes.
And you just had to shift their vision slightly.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden they're enlightened. I found that really, really interesting.
Well, that is quite a strong story, and it connects, I think, to the third noble truth, the truth that there is such in a way, which is that there is such a thing as enlightenment, that there is a cessation of suffering, and it's quite interesting because in that story they decide, don't they, that they're not going to greet him respectfully when he arrives because he's given up the quest as far as they're concerned.
Yeah.
He's slid into a life of luxury of eating rice and so forth. That they're not going to, they're just going to sit and not even really acknowledge him. But something about the force of his presence just compels them, and they despite having decided to, they do respond to him. And so, because when I was thinking about it tonight, I was thinking that third noble truth is quite interesting, which is that basically the truth that there is the possibility that suffering can cease, which effectively is saying there is enlightenment. And even though they decided that they weren't going to recognize him, there's something about him that showed, no, he is enlightened. He has achieved the goal that we've been searching for all these years. But I thought that's also quite an interesting question for us now, which is whether we believe that truth, that there is a cessation of suffering.
Yeah.
That it's possible, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of always find this a lot in Buddhism when there comes a point when you start discussing it. So we've been talking about the talk about the 8 steps, if you like, and it's all sort of rather matter of fact and it's in a way sort of mundane. But when you start really thinking about it, it starts getting closer to a point where you can't. It's difficult to discuss. And when you say, do I believe? So you didn't actually ask me directly, but I mean, if I'm asked, do I believe in that I can become enlightened?
Yeah.
Then I do. I can't. But I suppose I find it difficult to actually articulate exactly why that was. But it resonates with me, if you like, that idea that's possible.
Well, I can imagine why it would resonate for you, because, well, in the sense that even though you're not enlightened, you've had enlightening experiences, all the way from your first meditation class, your first experience meditating, I imagine, maybe not in the very first class, but maybe, an experience of stillness or contentment or ease that may have felt quite new, or a retreat, and you suddenly thought, oh, this is something. So that, that being a grounds for faith. I mean, speaking personally, that's certainly true for me. That I certainly can't say from my own experience that there's a cessation of human suffering. which correlates to enlightenment. But what I do know is that I've had experiences that point that way, and so I can kind of extrapolate. Mm-hmm. And I imagine that's what we all do. And that's why we're all here.
So you get sort of feedback, don't you? I mean, if you follow the teaching, or to the extent that you can, hopefully every now and again you actually get sort of feedback. I think one of the
from other people,
or from experience.
Oh, right.
So I think one of the most common ways is through in metta, the idea of metta,
right,
and generosity.
Yeah.
And how often dealings with other people are immensely pleasurable when you give more, and you don't,
right,
and you're not engaging with other people to take.
Yes.
And that's a very central part to a lot of the teaching of the Buddha.
Oh, I see. Right. Yes, that gives you confidence in his teaching, and therefore, if he says enlightenment is possible, then based on that experience, where he was right about that, about generosity, so maybe he's right about
the rest of it.
The rest of it.
All the rest of it.
Yeah. Yes.
So I was thinking also about going through the list. You may have noticed, I don't know why I'm opening up to it, but you may have noticed that as I got more towards right concentration and dwelling in wisdom, I sort of felt a little bit tongue-in-cheek about what does that mean, and I found myself sort of saying that. But and one of the things I was reading Sankaracharya's book, and on the Noble Eightfold Path, and I think he said something around when it gets to the more elevated you are in terms of your spiritual discussion, the less there is to say.
Oh yes, yeah.
Which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
The words are less useful.
Yeah. So are you saying when you were exploring the latter stages of the path, you felt, therefore, there was less you could say about those last couple of stages?
I suppose I felt the rest of them I could string a few sentences together to explain what it meant.
Yeah.
When it talks about dwelling in concentration, there's one sentence.
Yes.
And then I wanted to move on quickly.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So harder to talk about the profundity.
Yeah.
Because in another translation that is perfect samadhi, isn't it? That last stage. So that's like, and Bhante definitely talks about it as more than just your mind's a bit stiller than usual, but actually deep and profound concentration of mind, as you say, with the rising of wisdom as part of that.
Yeah, there were sort of different levels of samadhi, aren't there?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And I don't particularly want to have to discuss that.
So now you know what to ask about in a minute. Yeah. No, it is very practical. I mean, that's the fact that there is a fourth noble truth that lays out a path for transformation is brilliant. The fact that it's not just, for example, just have faith in the salvation. In your salvation, if you believe that Christ is the Son of God, you'll be saved. That's just asking for a leap of faith. This is saying, well, here's something you can do.
Yeah,
which is what, of course, all of us are doing, and then see if it makes a difference, like you did with generosity. Oh, that is actually helping. I do feel happier and more alive when I'm a bit more generous, a bit more metaphor.
You're operating in spheres which you have an influence, aren't you? You're actually taking actions around, that you can actually do something, and you can actually, they're sort of small enough that you can get some feedback and see that it works.
Yeah.
Which is obviously very encouraging. It took me a long time actually to be able to recite the Four Noble Truths and get it right.
Oh yeah.
Because I always thought I can name three of them. I could never get the fourth one. It's the third Noble Truth about the truth that there is a cessation to suffering.
Yes.
That I found very difficult to. I was wondering whether that was unnecessary.
Whether it's necessary.
A necessary step. Of course, there has to be a cessation.
But it should have just taught three noble truths. You didn't need that one. Okay, well, that's an interesting question. Is it necessary? Well, I suppose it is making in a way, that's the statement that possibly needs the most amount of faith to believe that there is a cessation of suffering. I mean, you said, when you were talking about it, you said it's because there's a cessation of craving, I noticed in your presentation. Yeah. And that requires a bit less faith, because, as I say, we'll all have moments where there was a cessation of craving. We're not thinking about this afternoon, actually. One of the pleasures of buying something is that the craving ceases for a moment. So actually we know that even in a very mundane sense, you finally got your hands on the thing you've been after. Yeah. Of course, it doesn't last very long, because then you want the next thing. But obviously he's talking about something much more profound, which maybe we experience, hopefully we've all experienced in meditation, of the mind just being stiller. The usual thoughts, which really are expressions usually of craving or aversion, if not always, actually just stop. And how blissful, how beautiful that is.
The piece of that. Isn't it strange?
Not often, just to say, but there are those moments that have real basis for faith. Therefore, like, oh yeah, there is such a thing as those restless, craving, aversion thoughts just stopping. So maybe that could be permanent. Bhante uses the analogy, doesn't he? He says, like, he's talking more about insight in this case, but of flashes of lightning. That through our Dharma life we can have these flashes of light, but that for a Buddha it's just
brilliant.
It's just brilliant all the time. That's right. There's just brilliance all the time. The lights are always on, sort of thing.
And that seems about right, isn't it? I mean, in terms of that, the relative sort of positions, in terms of our understanding. We get this brief flash. For the Buddha, it's just constant.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
What about the cause of our suffering is craving?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems so simple, doesn't it?
Yeah, so we just need to stop craving, and then we'll be fine.
Oh. Got to have a drink. I mean, it includes, so craving includes, the opposite, doesn't it, as well?
Yes, sure,
pushing away things, but
yeah.
it's sort of about trying to manipulate our experience, isn't it? Or manipulate the world.
Yeah.
To meet our experience. What does it? Bhante says about that. About it's easier to manipulate your. It's difficult to manipulate, to make the world. Oh yeah, to interpret your experience correct. Oh, I've forgotten what the expression is now. I should have thought about that before I said it.
I mean, there's the one I thought you might be talking about from the Buddha is where he says you've got two choices in a way. If you're suffering, you can either kind of cover the whole world in leather, so that you're not, as you walk around with bare feet, you protect yourself by covering the whole world in leather, or you just cover your own feet, wear some shoes. So that's in the sense of, that's what he made me think of. Like, you're not trying to change the rest of the world, you're just trying to change your response to it.
Yeah, I'm afraid I started an expression I can't finish, but that's a good point to end, isn't it? So I think that's us for this evening.
No, it's not. No.
No, for the.
Oh, for the video. Yes. Yeah. Oh, right. Bye.